The doctor slowly swam back to consciousness. The first thing he was aware of was the mild headache he was experiencing. The next thing that demanded his attention was a horrible taste in his mouth. He moved on to his other senses, and his inner ear told him he was horizontal. His back let him know he was on a bed. He opened his bleary eyes and looked over at Ace, who was reading some sort of wizard celebrity magazine. "Would you mind telling me why my mouth tastes like a urinal at the Willy Wonka factory?" he moaned. Ace threw the magazines to the side and hugged her foster father. A smile crossed her face at his unusual question.
Tonk said that chocolate was the best medicine for after a Dementor attack. You've been out for the last 3 days, so we've had to force feed it to you. I'm guessing the other thing you taste is the filth left over from those nasty bastards," she explained.
Chocolate? Yes, that actually makes sense. Dementors feed off of happy feelings. Phenylethylamine in the cocoa would restore some of the lost neurotransmitters, the doctor surmised. Luckily, my neurotransmitters are similar enough to a human's that it did repair some things. But I'm still unbalanced, he told Ace.
"I've known that for years, Professor,"
Ace muttered softly. The doctor scowled at Ace and replied, "Wonderful. A time-traveling comedian." He propped himself up on his elbows and then scooted into a sitting position. "What I really need right now is a strong cup of tea. The tannin molecule should put me right," he told her. As soon as he stopped speaking, a white porcelain tea set appeared on the end table next to his bed. Ace poured the doctor a steaming cup of tea and waited while he drank the whole thing. When he was done, Ace took the cup from him and put it back on the table.
"Better?"
she inquired. "Much, thank you," he replied. "And my thanks to whomever or whatever handles the food in this place. The tea was wonderful," he shouted into thin air. "Not that I'm complaining, mind you. But how am I still alive?" he asked.
"What's the last thing you remember, Professor?" Ace
inquired. A weak smile crossed the doctor's face as he remembered kissing Hermione, telling the Dementors to piss off, and running as fast as he could to give the students a chance for survival. He decided not to share that first bit with Ace. "Well, I yelled at the Dementors and ran off. The last thing I can recall is tripping and falling on the ground. After that, it's a blur of misery and pain," he replied. Ace chuckled a bit.
"Your young friends worked as a team to save the day. Something Professor Dumbledore says they do quite often,"
she told him.
"Ron kept the Dementors off of you as long as he could, while Hermione came up with a brilliant plan to use the stone ring to amplify Harry's Patronus charm,"
she explained. The doctor smacked his forehead, causing him to wince a bit. "Why didn't I think of that?" he asked rhetorically.
"Probably because you were too busy being the bloody hero and risking your life for others,"
Ace replied sarcastically.
"You're lucky Hermione was there, Professor. She's a brilliant one,"
she told him.
"I also think she has a bit of a thing for you,"
she said slyly. The doctor stammered. Ace caught how uncomfortable the nearly millennium-old alien seemed to be on the topic. She grinned as she realized what that could possibly mean.
"Feelings mutual, are they?"
she pressed. "No, of course. Well, maybe. Probably yes. I'm not really good with these types of things," the doctor admitted. Ace put on a mock look of surprise.
"Really? I would never have guessed. Come to think of it, I always sort of thought you were bent,"
she teased him. "What?" the doctor exclaimed. "Not that there's anything wrong with being bent, but I haven't been since my second life," he scolded her. Ace laughed at him, glad she was still able to get his goat after several years apart. "Ha ha," he said sourly. Swinging his legs off the bed, he stood up and reached over for his tie and jacket. "If you'll excuse me, I need to head to the bathroom," he said, and stepped past Ace. Ace put her hand on the doctor's arm to stop him for a moment.
"Just so you know, Miss Granger has spent nearly all of her free time watching over you. I took over just a little while ago so she could grab something to eat,"
she told him, and watched his expression lighten. Hermione ran through the old castle on her way to the library. She had gone straight from dinner to the doctor's room, only to find he had wandered off. Madame Pin scowled at Hermione when she hit the doors at a dead run. The look the librarian gave her froze Hermione to the spot.
"Sorry, Madame Pince,"
she apologized. With a deep sigh, the elderly woman jerked her head towards the magical history section and then went back to sorting through a rather dusty stack of books, some of which were doing their best to hop off the table. Hermione walked quickly through the large shelves full of books towards the rear of the library. The doctor saw Hermione coming and leaned casually against one of the ancient bookshelves. When she was within earshot, he motioned with his hand towards a nearby table that already had several books on it. "I reserved our favorite table," he told her, even though they were the only ones besides Madame Pince in the cavernous library.
"Doctor!"
Hermione squealed and hugged him. They both realized what was happening, and the hug ended with the pair of them stepping back, looking anywhere but at each other.
"I mean, glad to see you feeling better, Doctor,"
she said awkwardly. The doctor went back to leaning on the bookshelves. "Ace tells me that I have a certain young witch to thank for that," he told Hermione. A slight flush made its way up to Hermione's cheeks.
"Well, I did have some pretty good advice, even if it was rather vague,"
she replied.
"Honestly, Doctor, couldn't you have been more specific and just told me to use the stones to amplify a Patronus?" she wondered.
The doctor sat down at their table and motioned for Hermione to sit. He waited until she dropped her book bag on the table and sat down as well. "In hindsight, what you did makes perfect sense and was a wonderful example of applied physics. However, it never even occurred to me until Ace said something just a bit ago," he admitted. Using a mock conspiratorial whisper, he added, "I'm not used to having someone as bright as me along. Glad I did that time." Hermione's blush deepened. She glanced down at the table, wondering how she would ask what she had been agonizing over while she had kept watch over him.
Doctor, can we talk about what happened before you ran off and tried to get yourself killed?"
she asked, not meeting his eyes. He gulped loudly and nodded.
"I know I asked you to the dance, but I don't want you to feel like you have to go,"
she stated. "Are you withdrawing your offer, Miss Granger?" the doctor asked with a slight bit of disappointment in his voice. Hermione heard the catch in his voice and looked up at him hopefully.
No. I just didn't want you to think you were obligated to go with me,"
she replied. With a boyish grin, the doctor decided to take a chance for once and softly murmured, "You know, I could have just pushed you down to make my escape. I didn't have to add that other bit." He reached out his hand across the table and offered it to her. Hermione's heart leapt, and she felt like she could have flown around the castle without a broomstick. She slowly reached across her part of the table to take his hand. Right before their hands touched, the doctor snatched his away and held both hands over his ears, as if trying to block out some extremely loud sound. He looked at Hermione, and she thought she saw a mixture of terror and hope in his eyes. "I have to go," he said suddenly and ran past her to get out of the library.
"Doctor?"
was the only thing a shocked Hermione could get out. The doctor ran past Madame Pince and completely ignored her angry outburst at a second person running in her library. When the doctor made it into the hallway, he closed his eyes to focus on the sounds only he was able to hear. He decided it was louder on his right side and ran off in that direction. The sound he heard was the voice of a young woman crying out for help.
"Help me! Help find me! It's time!"